All right, there it is. Looks good.
Okay.
And I think we're ready to go. Good afternoon, everyone. Charles Moskowitz here. Thanks for joining me Monday through Friday, 12 noon to 1 p.m., live on YouTube and affiliated platforms. Welcome to the program. My guest this segment is Marianne Petrie, and Marianne has a book called Why Taking the Kids Was Not Enough. She is dismantling family court corruption. Marianne, thanks for joining me, first of all, this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you for having me on.
Marianne, let's go right to this story. It's a painful and difficult story, delving into an issue that affects, indirectly at least, all of us. And so let's start there. What happened and what led you to this?
Well, this is an issue that's involving men and women. It's fathers and mothers, everyone is involved. And when I decided to write the book, I had to write the book because everyone kept saying, "What happened? What happened to your kids?" And it almost makes you feel bad. Like, I mean, I didn't do anything wrong to have this happen. What happened was we had a first indication of emotional child abuse. And what had happened was the oldest child, um, she just did not like the rules in my home. And then she had lied to me. So then she packed up a big bag and she went to school. And it was my day to have her again, but she did not come out of school. So she did not, she just went to her father's house. And I kind of knew this. But at the same time, I had a call from CPS wanting to come over and talk. And I let this woman in my house. And as soon as she came in my house, she said, "If you are indicated on these charges of emotional child abuse, you're going to lose your job as a registered nurse." I'm like, whoa, I better cooperate with her.
Right.
So luckily, my husband was on unemployment and he was in the living room with us, listening to her berate and scream at me for approximately 2.5 hours. And we're sitting here looking at this individual, and I'm saying, "Don't talk to me like that. I'm a registered nurse. Don't talk to me like that." Then she started talking about financial issues regarding my ex-husband, of things she shouldn't even know about, like, say, a pension fund. So she was basically talking about a pension fund and why I wasn't happy with the child support I was getting, which is not even, why are we talking about this when we should be talking about the children? But that was her main focus.
Right. Now, Marianne, let me just get a little background here. So, we're talking about child custody after a divorce. Is that right?
Right.
And that this woman worked for the state, social service agencies. Every state has one. Some of them are very tough. And in Massachusetts, where I am, there are stories of them taking children out of homes at late in a Friday afternoon. And I'm not saying that may not be warranted in certain cases if the parents are violent or on drugs, but there are questions about the legality and the due process elements to that. But in your case, that obviously wasn't the case. What happened is, at least what I gather at this point, is that you had joint custody of your child, and that she went to the school administration and said something about you that maybe she probably didn't mean to set off this chain of events, but that's what I gather happened.
See, we had been 50-50 shared custody for years, almost 10 years, really. And we were co-parenting very well until the third party entered the picture. And what had happened was I introduced him to a woman who was an acquaintance. And I can't remember if I was clear on knowing her job, but she did work in the courthouse. And I
Okay.
was not kind of aware of that. So when she entered the picture, that's when everything started falling apart very
Now, when you
quickly.
say she entered the picture, was she dating your ex-husband? Is that how?
Yes, I was playing
Okay,
matchmaker,
I
and
understand.
and so what had happened was, they talked on the phone. Within 2 weeks, she moved in, and within 7 months, they were married. And that's not easy on the kids either, but, that's what had happened, and
Now, is
things
this
had
the same woman that was coming into your house?
oh, no,
Okay.
this was, his wife worked at the courthouse. I'm, not sure if she had ties to this caseworker that came barreling into my home. I question that, to be honest with you. And from that time of the indication, I even had this caseworker call me up at work and yell at me. And I said, "Well, what's going on? Am I being indicated?" And she yelled at me on the phone while I'm working in the emergency room, taking care of very sick patients. "When you become indicated, you'll be hearing from me first." And she was screaming on the phone. So I hung up on her.
And this is a state employee calling you
Yes.
at your work. Now, what exactly happened with your daughter at the school? What did she say that triggered all this?
Well, I'm not sure because it's all vague. As I read the paperwork, it's all a one-sided story coming from the ex and his wife.
Well,
They were
why
make
don't you ask your daughter though?
She wouldn't speak to me.
I see.
I
Now,
tried
do you
texting her.
think that was this something that she was turned against you by the ex-husband and his wife? Is that it? Oh,
Unfortunately,
that's terrible.
they had been working on her at an early age, because about 7 years had passed, and I noticed behaviors in her that were not nice, not kind.
Now,
She
couldn't
was
you get with your ex-husband and talk about, being more equitable as parents? I mean, at that point, and not having this kind of thing where you use the children to get at each other.
Well, I didn't realize this was happening. This parental alienation was even happening because I really didn't even know the word parental alienation. Um, Really, I had no idea this was happening. It happens so insidiously. I really didn't see it
I
coming.
understand. So then gradually she was withdrawing from you, and it was not as obvious as something that you could notice. And then one day she just pulled some kind of a trigger at school, and that you feel this was instigated by your ex and his new wife.
Right. And on top of that, when the caseworker came barreling into my house, my parents were there as well.
Hmm.
But she didn't interview my parents. She didn't take him in the garage and say, "Hey, what's going on here? What do you think of her as a mother? What's going on?" She did not interview them one bit, not
And
even my
your ex-husband was there as well. Is that right?
well, my current husband was
Your
sitting
current
there.
husband. Okay.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I don't, look, I have to ask this, and I feel bad asking, but did your daughter make any accusations of physical abuse, or was it simply that she didn't like the cereal you served her that morning? I mean, what I need to get, what was the range of the complaint?
The range of the complaint was that, there wasn't enough food, which there was a lot of food in the fridge. In fact, the caseworker looked in the fridge. And, she did not like the rules in my house, which I had told her from the very beginning, "No boys up in your room for 2.5 hours unsupervised. It's not gonna
Okay.
happen."
How old is your
And
daughter?
well, she was actually going on 17 when this was going on.
Okay. Okay. I'm speaking as a father myself, so I mean, I can somewhat get this. Um, the so she didn't like the rules in the house, and then she spoke with someone at the school about this, which I would think that in a normal situation, if something like that happened, like if a complaint like that is lodged, the school would call you directly, or the nurse would call you directly, and you could go in and pick up your daughter, and maybe they might ask you a couple of questions you don't like, but nevertheless to go right to authorities and to talk to the state agency that has the power to take children out of the home. I mean, to me, that right there is a breakdown in the way you would think a system is supposed to work.
See, we were trying to figure out who called in the complaint, and, my son told me it was the psychologist because she'd been seeing a
Mhm.
psychologist. We had them all in family counseling, and what
Right.
had happened as things become insidious is when he had the children on his time, he would set up the appointment with the psychologist without telling me when. How can you have family counseling without the mother or the father there?
Well, I mean, again, I'm no expert here, but my understanding is that a psychologist really is only supposed to call authorities if they feel there is some kind of an imminent threat to the child. If the child is physically endangered in some way, that they report something that's violent, then the psychologist actually by law is supposed to contact authorities.
Mm.
So, but that doesn't seem to be what happened here.
No,
I mean,
no.
the charge is emotional. I mean, that's not, that everyone has emotional problems. I mean, that's not something you call authorities over.
It was even well, I asked the caseworker, I said, "When was the last case of emotional abuse founded?" And she said, "That was 30 years ago."
Well, I mean, I mean, also, I would have to. We should take a look at their rules and regulations and the law, and try to get to what is the exact definition of emotional abuse. I mean, this is a rather subjective term.
It was it was severe. I mean, the consequences to this were so severe that I could not hold my job in the emergency room. Once indicated, due to the Child Protective Services laws, you are not allowed to hold a job that you could come in contact with children.
All right, Marianne. So that once you were accused of quote unquote emotional abuse, without anyone actually defining that, other than a very vague accusation that there wasn't enough food in the house, which you proved there was, and that you had a rule about your daughter being alone with a male in her room. That other than that, because of that accusation, you lost your job.
Yes, and also my daughter lied to me, and I don't tolerate lying with any of my children. I've always said, "Tell the truth." I
Sure.
mean, it didn't have to come to this. Really, was it worth it?
Well, how did once this whole thing went down, what did you tell your daughter? I mean, at that point?
Well, I texted her and I said, "I if you ever wanna talk, I'm here. I love you. Let's talk." She never she just did not respond. I think she did send me a text, "I love you too," but that was it. And then I never heard from her
She
since.
obviously, she's a teenager who's going through some teenage angst, and there can be a temporary moment of anger at a parent. I mean, I realize that, but and that there was a divorce and there was a separation. But I mean, it just seems weird that the problem I have, I mean, that's all normal. But the problem I have is the business of the government stepping in like this and actually, without any form of due process, depriving you of your job. And you cannot work now as a registered nurse.
Correct. I was suspended from my job with no unemployment. I even tried to go
No
through an un
benefits.
no. I
S-
tried to get a hearing for unemployment, and because of the indication, they would not. I collected about 2 checks, and then they cut me off.
Now, this was, I mean, look, I mean, I get the fact that somebody can lose their job, but this was at a hospital and you were being told that they could not legally hire you after this?
Correct. Due to the Child Protective Services laws, um, you are not allowed to hold a job where you can come in contact with children because you are now lumped in with your emotional child
Oh my
abuse
God.
along with physical and sexual child abusers.
Oh my God. So what a disaster. So your name went on a list
Yes.
of physical and sexual abusers, like
Yes.
and that's a registered list that's national. That's devastating. That is awful. I am
It
so sorry to hear that.
Well, the thing that also happened was, in the meantime, a couple months later, about 3 months later, my ex comes in with an emergency petition wanting to remove the other children out of the house.
Oh my God. Yeah. And
And
these other children were younger children?
they were 14s and 15s.
Okay. Okay. Now, what did the other children, what was your relationship with them at the time?
We're very close.
Okay.
Yeah, we're
Okay.
very close. I mean, they were great kids, you know, they would fight over the lawnmower because they thought that was fun to do. I really had no
Right. That's normal. But
great kids.
the thing is that that you and your ex-husband had shared 50-50 custody at the time. They had their own rooms. They were living in your house with your new
Mhm.
husband. They would share the time with your ex, and everything seemed normal until this terrible incident with your oldest daughter. But then 2 months later, they want to take out the other two. Oh
Correct,
my
and
God.
the judge even said, "This is all based on conjecture. If these children were in danger, why are we removing them now? Why weren't they removed
Right.
several months
That's
ago?"
exactly the thought I had. Well, exactly.
And the caseworker's standing there all happy with a smile on her face, and what had happened was he, as Pontius Pilate did, was recuse himself based on a vague relationship I had with his wife. I used to work for the judge's wife 20 some years ago.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking, how can he recuse himself? Why not put the burden back on to the caseworker? She should have removed those children months ago if they thought I was a danger to my children.
What is the deal with this social worker? I mean, does he have some kind of a vendetta against you, or is he just sadistic?
I think, well, actually, just a caseworker. She held no licensed social work degree at all.
I see.
Yeah, and
So
she
she
only
was
had
just a
a
government employee.
yeah, with a degree in child development, really. Um, it was,
Was there any oversight there? Could you have gone to her superior and talked about this?
I was talking to her superior about this and what was going on, and I even notified the governor's office, which was very interesting because he was newly elected, and I let their office know detailed what had happened. So they called the agency and said what was going on.
Hmm.
And, the supervisor there, because I was keeping in close contact with him, said that basically they had a very big meeting with all the caseworkers and that none of these caseworkers are allowed to call anyone mentally unstable unless they have a degree in psychology and a PhD. And he said that they did remove her from the field. I said, "So you promoted her?" He said, "Well, no, we gave her a desk job."
Hmm.
I'm thinking, "Nah." Well, what had happened was Pontius Pilate, that judge, handed us over to a family court judge, and it just got disastrous from there. And that's when she sat on the stand and said that she had been promoted by her agency when her boss had told me, "No, this was not a promotion."
Well, obviously at this point, since you had gone over the head and you actually went to the governor's office, there was some bad ill will there. The agency felt that you had exposed them to negative attention on the part of a new governor. And by the way, we're talking Pennsylvania here, and that therefore they might have been really out to get you at that point.
It just did not stop. It was just relentless because we also, when we went into court to family court, that judge had some collusion going on with the opposing attorney because they had a relationship working in the courthouse together
Mm,
years ago. And we had asked for the judge to recuse himself. And he was very brutal and he was very angry and berating. And he stated, "I'm not going to recuse myself. I know this case better than anyone else. So I'm going to run this case."
Mhm.
And I could have walked in there with a Hollywood team of lawyers I still would have lost based on their relationship.
Hmm.
And also was going on at the same time was my ex had once that judge basically he had ruled in favor of the father having a more stable home while I was being labeled mentally unstable.
So, yeah, I mean, this is all based on this one incident, and, these are people who are not qualified to get again, to make that kind of judgments. They're not psychologists, not
Right.
psychiatrists. And yet this is, in a courtroom with a judge who refused to recuse himself and who, had some kind of a personal relationship with the prosecutor.
Right, and the judge and his opposing attorney, they were running the show. Even my attorney asked, "Why won't you go back to 50-50? Why not?" And the judge said, "I have my reasons." I basically purchased every transcript.
Now, what about your ex-husband at this point? Was he, like, after you, or did you
Oh,
maintain any
yes.
kind of okay, so then that had broken down.
Right, he would not I would email him and barely get a response. If that, then it turned into no response. And, what I had to do was clear my name of this indication of emotional child abuse. So, we went through a, child services judge, and he listened to everyone's testimony, and as it turned out, I was exonerated.
Mhm.
So, I called the hospital back and I said, "Hey, I can come back to work. I've got the paperwork to show I've been exonerated." Everybody was thrilled. And so they said, "We'll have you come back next week. We got you lined up." So as it turned out, 4 days later, I get a call from a caseworker who I picked up the phone. She immediately starts screaming at me on the phone. I said, "Look, if you're gonna talk to me like that, you go call my lawyer," and I hung up on her. 1 week later, she calls back, and she's got a very pleasant demeanor while she's informing me that I'm being indicated again with emotional abuse charges on the next child. And those charges were that I would not let him ride his bike around the block, which was completely false, and that I took away his Xbox.
Oh my god. Well, Marianne, I mean, first of all, how did they even know this? Did he I mean, he obviously has joint custody, so maybe he told his father, I mean, and that they then used that? Is that how that happened?
I really don't understand. See, we were doing supervised visits, and during the time she filed this indication, the second indication, was directly after they took the kids away from me. So I didn't really see my children for
So you
a
didn't
period.
even they weren't even, there at this point when this was
Right,
filed?
and it was winter, so how could you ride your bike in the winter? And I've always let him ride his bike because he wanted exercise. I've just said, we lived in a decent neighborhood. All I just said was, Just watch out for cars." I've never denied him that. And as far as his Xbox, that was going back and forth between the houses. So at tax
So
p
then this sounds like a completely bogus charge, and,
Yes.
did you ever are you in communication with your son about this or not?
Well, I was reading the documentation that the caseworker filled out, and she said she went to talk to him at school, pulled him out of class, which he was very upset about because he's kinda like OCD. He wants good grades, and he's never missed a day of school.
Right.
And so when she pulled him out and he said, "I don't have any issues with my mother. There's no problems." And he shut down and would not speak to her. And however, with the second frivolous, fraudulent indication at
Mhm.
taxpayers' expense, I still
Yeah.
was suspended again. I couldn't
Oh.
work. And then what had happened was all the hospitals at that time had to have all their nurses and employees have background checks, their fingerprinting done, and your child abuse clearances. And several months had gone by, and I wasn't going to be able to make that cutoff because I scheduled another hearing with the child services judge, and that happened about close to 4 weeks after you had to have these clearances in.
Hmm.
So I lost my job involuntarily. And they all knew it that I was getting the raw end of the deal. And so I lost my job completely at that hospital and went before this child services judge, who then did clear me, and I was exonerated again.
Hmm. Okay.
And that took about a month to do it. Oh, it takes about a month to wait to be exonerated, so you're constantly waiting.
And you did this all pro se, so there weren't legal fees involved, and you studied the law and went before the judge yourself.
Well, actually, I had an attorney at this time. At this time I did, but
Hmm.
it got to the point where after I was cleared of that, then I wanted to file to the Superior Court a motion to stay. And I showed it to her and I said, "Here, could we file this?" I didn't file it yet. I was wondering, could you file it? And apparently she took offense and she dropped me. So after paying out countless thousands of dollars, and I decided, okay, I'm going to do this pro se. I had help from a friend who was talking to me about paperwork and what I should file and how to file in Superior Court. But as things were going along, I was not able to pay this child support that the ex husband felt he should have. And his basic goal was to make my husband pay the child support. And we were not in a financial position to do that. With my job loss, my husband had to take jobs out of town to make more money
Oh,
to
wow.
cover the bills and the mortgage. So, what began was support and contempt hearings. And the long
Do
and
you think
short,
that do you think the motivation then of your ex was to get more child support? Is that what this was about?
correct, he was wanting close to 1,000 a month. And he
Oh,
really did not need the money.
right.
Um, he was in a very well set up job, wasn't taking the kids enough. That's why I called the book Dismantling Family Court Corruption, Why Taking the Kids Was Not Enough. And um, it
So
was
then
really
he and his new wife manufactured this charge and
correct.
got this agency, which already didn't like you because you had already called the governor's office, and they just went with it, and they actually were honest about the silliness and the frivolity of these charges when they called you, but they went forward anyway.
They did, and they should have been sanctioned because normally I've been told that when there is a big custody trial going on, they're not to get involved because there's already attorneys involved, judges involved. They're they know what's going on. And in fact, I have it in transcript with the second caseworker stating to the judge, yes, I know there were custody hearings going on, and the father was calling the agency once to twice a week with updates between the mother and the son.
Okay.
And why
So
was, yeah,
yeah, I mean, it's just putting aside the breakdown of communication. I mean, it's to me. I mean, again, I'm looking at this, from your perspective. I don't know the whole story, of course. Putting that aside, it looks like a shakedown to me. Now, what then happens, Marianne?
well, with the support contempt hearings, I was going before another judge, and she was exceptionally brutal. And I had been seeing a counselor for years, but this counselor said, this is almost getting personal with this judge. It's personal with the opposing attorney, and now it's getting personal with this child support judge. And I was in a contempt box with a bunch of guys, and the one guy next to me said, I don't know why I'm here. I've paid up my child support. I'm thinking, oh man. So it was getting to be 9 o'clock and the judge comes out. She calls me first. and she's very nasty. She has poor demeanor. And she said, if you can come up with $2,000, I won't put you in jail. You've got 1 month to come up with $2,000 or you're going to jail. Now, at that time, I'm so sorry to back up, but when I was sitting in the contempt box, my ex had shown up with his attorney and his parents. And this was Holy Week. And the bailiff walked over to them before we started and said to the opposing attorney, "What are you doing here?" in that tone. And the opposing attorney just looked over and said, "We're just here to observe." And I'm thinking to myself in the contempt box with all these poor men, I thought, yeah, you're waiting for me to be shackled up like Jesus and hauled off to jail. That's what you're doing.
Right.
So as
So ugly. I'm sorry about that. Boy.
well, the thing was, as I was saying with the first caseworker, she was talking about a pension fund. She knew financial things about my ex-husband and really didn't care to talk about my daughter. So my attorney had won the pension fund that he did not provide. That pension fund wasn't big bucks or anything. It was about $2,200, but that would have been able to keep me out of prison.
Hmm.
And so I tried. I even went to a magistrate. I tried to extract this money from the ex-husband so I would not end up in jail. I even emailed the ex-husband and I said, "Hey, can you call the dogs off? Can you shut this case down? This is not going to be good for the kids, for their mother to be sent to prison. I would not do this to you." And no response. So a month later, I checked into the sheriff's office and I was shackled up with the wrists and at the ankles, and they took me into, they said, it's not jail, it's actually prison.
There was no conviction or anything. I mean, it's just it was just a ruling. I mean,
It was a rolling, either I come up with that and you've got this date, then show up to the sheriff's office.
oh my God.
And yeah, and the thing was, it was just very interesting. The sheriffs were very nice to me. Um, but once you get into prison, I want to point out that my ex was telling my other children that mom is going to be in there playing tennis and knitting. And that was far from the case when I was in there with the general population.
Oh, sorry to hear that. How long were you in there for?
Well, the judge had ordered 2 months, and I thought, I'm going to do this. I'm going to show her I can tough this out. Unfortunately, at the same time, going through family court and everything that and the trauma of that, I had to go on an antidepressant and an anti-anxiety medication. That's also in the book.
Hmm.
And what had happened was you cannot take someone cold turkey off of this medication. It makes you very ill.
Right. Hmm. Yeah, I've heard that.
And so it got to be like the second night, and I went to the nurse because I was having some chest pain that was in my back as well and radiating to my jaw, and I was dizzy and sweaty. And I said to the nurse, I said, "Is it possible? Could I go to the emergency room?" And the guard answered for her and said, "We don't do that here." And I said, "Okay." I said, "I'm going to need my medication or I'm going to go into withdrawals." And the nurse says, "Well, we'll have to wait till Wednesday. That's when you'll get some of your medication." I said, "Well, what are the dosages?" They weren't even the correct dosages, which is all of this is a human rights violation is going on in every prison to every prisoner of
It is.
whatever.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the prisons do not give proper medication. And
Correct.
it's not a matter even of money because even if you can afford them, you don't get them.
You don't.
Yeah.
No. In fact, what had happened was I had vomited everywhere. Whoops.
Hmm. It's
And
okay.
the
By
inmates
the
were
way,
so nice.
that's the cover of your book. I should
Yes.
mention.
I also sell the prints for 8x10s for $25 with free shipping.
While we're on the topic, how do people get the book?
Oh, you can find it on Amazon, Kindle. Apple, Barnes& and Noble, and Smashwords.
Good.
And if you go on my website, Dismantling Family Court Corruption, it'll pull you up the book and you just can hit purchase book and that will swing you right into Amazon.
Okay, so again, the book is Dismantling Family Court Corruption. Marianne Petrie. Marianne, I heard of you through LinkedIn, so that's also a good place to go.
Right, right.
So
And
anyway, getting back to this terrible and gruesome story. So yeah, how long were you in for and what happened?
well, I was going to just last 1 week because I had called my father on Thursday evening and I said, and you have to race to a phone. When they open up those grating gates and they yell, move, you better run to a phone and grab it. So I grabbed it. I called my dad. I said, you've got to get me out of here or I'm going to come out in a body bag. This is what's happening, chest pain and the withdrawal from the medication. And so he said, what do I do? I explained. So by 11 o'clock Friday morning, I was being released. And um, what had also happened was I was also in the process of filing to Superior Court myself as a pro se litigant representing myself, the child support case, because that was getting out of control. And so I submitted all that and I had to wait. The Superior Court sent out a letter saying, we're not going to let any attorneys argue because we've got too many cases. So we're just going to read briefs. And I thought, well, I was really mad at first, but then I thought maybe God wants me to shut up. So I just had to sit tight. In the meantime, 5 months after this prison episode, I did have a heart attack.
Oh, sorry to hear that.
I had, in fact, when I went in to visit all my friends in the ER, they were so happy to see me, but not under these circumstances. But they really thought it was broken heart syndrome. They said, "There's no way. Your cholesterols are awesome. There's no way you could be having a heart attack." But once he got in there, he found 3 blockages to the LAD.
Okay. That's too bad. I'm sorry to hear that.
Well, in what was actually, well, it's really not funny, but about a week and a half later, I had to go before the same judge, Marguerite Spear, who definitely had a vendetta out for me. And she said to me, so you can't pay this amount. I'm going to give you a physician verification letter. And you take this to your family doctor and you have him fill this out and you have 7 days. And this is the only thing that's keeping you out of prison today. And I'm thinking to myself, but I just gave you all the cardiologists' notes from the hospital. Why
So did
wasn't
you
that
get
good enough?
did you get the documents to her in time? I mean,
Oh, yeah, I did. I went right to my family doctor that day. I had him
yeah.
fill it out because he knew what was going on with me. And I took it to her office the next day. And
Was everything okay after that, or in terms of
well,
staying out of?
yeah, I mean, that I had a brief time. I was not being harassed after I gave her that, but I was still having chest pain and that was continuing. But what had happened was a late Christmas present, which was my husband, Brad, came to me and said, here's a big envelope from Superior Court. I'm going, oh no, maybe I lost this one too. But I opened it up and it said vacate and remand. I said, oh my gosh. I said, we won, but
Mhm.
he goes, what do you mean? I don't understand this. I said, well, vacate, if they just would have wrote vacate, that would have wiped away all the arrears and stopped the child support. But they wrote on remand, which means you have to go back down to the lower court in front of Judge Marguerite Spear and have her fix this. So my counselor said at the time, she says, you know what, you've had a heart attack, you're still having this chest pain. I know of a Supreme Court attorney. Why don't you check her out? She's in a different city. And I talked to my husband. I said, yeah, I don't know if physically I can do this at this time. So we hired her. And she wasn't any more expensive than anyone else. And she's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And when I met with her, she said, "Okay, Judge Spear is ticked off because you won in Superior Court." And she was kinda laughing. She says, "I wish I would have known you 1.5 years ago. None of this should have happened. You should never have been paying child support. You should have never gone to prison." I said, "Well, you know, here I am." But
Mm,
once she got in there, in the meantime, I had to have another heart catheterization to make sure nothing was blocked.
right.
So thankfully, nothing was. And about a week later, we were back in court, and the Supreme Court attorney said to the judge, who was, I don't know, she was talking, and my attorney interrupted her and said, "Your Honor, you have to abide by what Superior Court ruled." And I was like, wow. She threw her, she just let them all have it. In fact, when his attorney spoke, that judge was constantly saying overruled, overruled, everything he tried opening his mouth up. I object, argumentative. In fact, I went to object, and my attorney grabbed my hand, like, don't say anything. And she objected and said, he's being argumentative, sustained. It was just awesome to see my attorney in action. And
Mhm.
then at the end of this whole shenanigans, my attorney says, "Your Honor, could we please look at the ex-husband's W-2?" And then the judge goes, "You two get up here." She's a chirper. "You two get up here." So the attorneys got up there, and they were up there for a long time. And I was kind of leaning over the rail, and I was just exhausted from everything. And the bailiff got me a chair because this was taking a while. And my attorney came back to me and said, "Okay, we know exactly what he's making." So the order came back that I did not have to pay 1,000 a month in child support. She lowered it to 108, and then to pay only $10 on the arrears, that she
Mhm.
lowered from 15,000 to 11,000. Wasn't that gracious of her?
Well, I mean, it's interesting that it took so long and you had to go through such a process before they finally took a look at his income
Right. The
and actually, I mean, that's sad, and it's also astonishing the amount of power that these people have. I mean,
right.
especially judges. I mean, it's an awesome power. I mean, we've seen that operate
Mhm.
on all levels, even including the Supreme Court. They can make a ruling that can change the world. I mean, they can. It's
Oh, yeah.
unbelievable the
Right.
literal power that these people have.
And it's not worth it because, 2 things. When I was in prison, my son told me that he had a physical altercation with his father. The father had whipped him in the arm with a water bottle and took him by the back of the neck. And I
Mhm.
said, "I can't help you." I said, "If you want to tell your school counselor and they can call it in," which they did. I was surprised. I was very proud of him that he had the courage to go in and talk about it. And the result of that was that agency said, "Well, every parent has different parenting styles."
Mhm. I see. So then he got a. I mean, look, not that I want to see any more of this cycle, but it was just interesting the different way that was treated. So, Marianne, let's bring things up to today. What is happening now? Where are you now? Are you speaking to your children at this point? What's happening?
I have 2 of the older one and the other one have been manipulated that they don't speak to me. I don't think they want anything to do with me. The youngest one will be turning 18, and he really likes the stepfather. They get along great,
Mhm.
and, he talks to me, thank God. And what also has happened was I also lost my nursing license in the throughout all of this as well, because my counselor said, "I know you wanna work as a nurse, you can go back, but you really your level of concentration is kind of just because of family court and that the trauma that had caused post-traumatic stress disorder from just going through family court on top of
Oh
this
yeah, no,
child support judge, just she was just relentless.
yeah.
So my counselor said, "I'm going to report you to the board and have your license taken away. I just can't see you operating as a safe nurse." And I said, "Well, I guess I would have to honestly agree because I was just so scattered." I lost my concentration. And I found, as I've been talking to other parents, I have been talking and counseling other parents. I tell them I'm not a counselor, but we're all talking about the same thing. And any advice I can offer them, I try to do that, you know. But just talking to other people, everyone's gone through the same thing. It's just absolutely horrible. And what I would like to see done for everybody is to have
Mhm.
video cameras installed in every courtroom throughout the United States. And these video cameras, of course, will be monitoring the judge and the witness stand and two cameras facing the pews. Because if you saw how these people react when they take your children away, their behavior is despicable. My ex and his entourage, they were bursting out in laughter and clapping. And the judge, with the collusion, he didn't slam his gavel down and say, silence in my courtroom. And there's great support on Facebook with parental alienation sites and or child custody CPS sites that help you navigate and listen to you. And actually, an attorney wrote to me and she said, under no circumstances is it laughable, whooping and clapping and cheering in a courtroom when a child is taken away under any circumstances. So I can guarantee you there was a lot of lying going on. And it's like, yes, that
No, I mean, I think you make a good case. I mean, the only downside I see to cameras in the courtroom is that you're going to end up with a lot of prosecutors and judges performing for the camera. They're going to think they're going to become superstars.
well, see, what I was thinking also was that you would have a panel of 2 to 3 individuals reviewing the cases as this judge rules to make sure they're done fairly and there's no collusion going on. And it would also be good backup for a new judge, like for a ruling if they bring in a child that's been abused. And what if he feels that maybe the judge should go back to those parents? And you have another panel saying, I don't know if he's making the right ruling. We've got to reevaluate this immediately. I think it would be good to
I think
have a
there's
panel.
also, if I could interject as well,
Mhm.
it's not a bad idea to really try to strenuously have out of court settlements in this
Correct.
case, where and not bring in the state authorities when there's a situation with children so quickly. Even if they do get called, they should not do it unless there's really cause to believe that there's physical harm or sexual harm, God forbid.
Mhm.
And that if a case proceeds, it should be done with a negotiator, a separate arbitrator that can sit down with both parties and then either recommend a ruling to a judge or actually have a certain judicial power invested in them that they can make a ruling, but that it would be done before getting involved with the actual court, because once you go into a courtroom, it's just it's really big time, and it's not going to be helpful to either side, and it's really, I mean, it's a sad situation. I mean, Marianne, I think that you seem to have found some peace at this point. I mean, I hope that you can find some kind of reconciliation with your family. That's all I can say. I mean, it's heartrending to think that you could be separated from your children.
All on based on lies. And the judge took the caseworker's word for it. I mean, she's not even educated enough to make that decision. It was really pathetic. And he did rule at the end because he was trying to rule for visitation and the ex would not cooperate for months. He just would not cooperate. You drive over and the lights were on, but there was no one home. So we had to go back to court again to tell the judge he's not cooperating. And again, a slap on the wrist. So there's really no accountability. And these judges have to hold these parents accountable when they are not cooperating with visitation orders. And that's a big problem. Other parents have said, well, they should send the other parent to prison if they're in contempt. And again, I'm going to say I disagree with prison. I don't think it's good for the
No,
kids.
it's not the place. There's no
No,
need for that. We're not talking even about violent crimes here. The fact that
right.
that would even enter into the picture is absolutely a disgrace. It's terrible. Um,
Exactly.
Marianne, I'm sort of reaching toward the end of it here. So
Okay.
let my viewers and listeners know where they can get your book, where they can get information about you and your case.
Okay. My case, well, you can find my book on dismantlingfamilycourtcorruption.com, Amazon, Kindle, Apple, Barnes and Noble, and Smashwords. Also, I have been approached by a Canadian producer, James Russell of Manx Motion Picture Studios Incorporated. He wants to take this book and turn it into a film called Custody Denied.
Wonderful.
So he's working on a screenplay as we speak, and he's entering it into contests, and it's doing very well. So we
Good.
would like to find an A-list director and an A-list actress is what he's looking for, because he wants to show the corruption of family court and what people are going through.
Well, you tell the story very well, and I'm sure in your book you certainly do it well here. You might want to even send a link of this YouTube to him, and so he can hear you talk about this. And
Oh,
I wish you well with it. I hope you do well with that, Marianne.
right. And I'd like to say one thing also is I think they should be doing psychological evaluations for all these judges every 2 years.
Oh yeah, I
I,
mean, right. I mean, I couldn't agree. It's such an incredible power that they have, and that once they're in office, it becomes very difficult to even criticize them, let alone remove them. So yeah, I
right.
mean, I agree with that. All right, Marianne Petrie, I want to thank you again for joining me this afternoon.
Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
All right, thanks.